Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is so great to have you with us today, and thank you for making the time to join this session as part of ANZ's Future Ready Now webinar series. Whether you've been following along for this series or you're joining us for the first time today, we're really pleased to have you with us. A couple of quick housekeeping items. Today's session is being recorded, so if this sparks or we really should send this to the team to make them have a look, you will be able to do exactly that after the session. And importantly, please post your questions as we go. If you see a question in the Q&A that you'd like us to cover, please give it a like so that we can prioritise what's most useful for the audience today. Towards the end of the session, my colleague Tolo Crow will jump in and read out the top questions for us to be tackling. But before we get started formally, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are meeting today. I'm joining from Melbourne on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I acknowledge their continuing connection to land, waters and community. I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people joining us from today. Now, my name is Kathleen Harker, and if you joined one of these before, you'll know that I often like to refer to myself as one of ANZ's self-confessed payment nerds, which basically just means I spend a lot of time thinking about what's changing in payments, why it matters, and how we make sure it actually works in practice and not just on some PowerPoint slides. So earlier this year, many of you joined us for our real-time payments webinar. Now, that session was very much about the foundations of what's changing in Australia's payment landscapes, what real-time payments really means, and why the move to run modern rails really matters. You also heard some stories from some of our customers about their journeys to date. Now, don't worry, you haven't been duped into attending a repeat of that session. Instead, we like to think of this as the sequel. We're aiming for a bit more of a Godfather Part 2 vibe than a straight to DVD outcome with this session, but we're going to go into much deeper into what happens next in the move to real-time payments. And that's because we find once organisations get comfortable with this idea of real-time payments, the next set of questions tends to sound actually a little bit different. It becomes less, what is this? And more, how does this actually fit into the way we run our business? How do you integrate real-time payments into existing systems and processes? What changes when money moves instantly, but your controls, reconciliation, support models were all designed for batch-based processing? And how do you move forward without this turning into or feeling like it's a big multi-year rebuild exercise? Now, that space between capability and execution is where we see most organisations spending their time right now. And to be honest, from our perspective, that's where things get really interesting. Because while the rails may be real time, many operating models today aren't. Cut-offs, approvals, exception handling, even comfort levels, many of those assumptions were built for a very, very different world. So today is about getting practical. Rather than this being another presentation, we really wanted today to feel like a conversation, a fireside chat, if you will, as much as we can do this from an online perspective. But we want a chance to explore what we're seeing on the ground and what tends to work well when organisations get stuck and what good actually looks like once you zoom out beyond just the payment itself. So to help us unpack that today, I'm joined by Matt Cafferty, ANZ's Head of Digital Integration, who works with organisations of all kinds as they scale from intent into delivery across host-to-host connectivity, APIs, operating models, control and scale. So Matt, good morning. How are you today?
Hello. Bang.
Yeah. So if you joined us in February, you will remember that Matt shared the bank's perspective on what it really takes to make real-time payments work end to end. Today, we're going to pick that thread back up and we're going to go a layer deeper. So this session is designed to be practical, honest and interactive. And always, we encourage you to use it as a prompt to take one concrete next step. Whether that's revisiting a particular payment journey, pressure testing your operating model for a 24/7 environment, or starting a conversation internally about where payments fit strategically. So with that, Matt, let's set the scene. When we spoke last in February, many organisations were still sort of getting comfortable with this concept of what real-time payments actually means. If we fast forward to where things are today, where are you starting to see clients actually move from that curiosity phase into action?
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you for your wonderful enthusiasm about this. Look, I'm really, everybody who joined the previous ones and have joined any of these sorts of things know that I'm pretty open and honest about how we operate, from the goods and the bads and the things that we can do well and the things that we certainly can do better. what I'm really keen on seeing some of the questions come through as well. I'm really happy to answer what that looks like from your business and your companies, and right from your technology to your operations team. So please use the Q&A so we can get to them and get through as many of them as possible. The more you get, the less you get to hear me ramble on about what I think and how I think things should be. Look, I'm going to take it from obviously from the host-to-host integration perspective, and how we can manage that and assist in how we can onboard customers and really start to talk about the trends of what we've seen. And I'm not going to go all the way back to the beginning of direct entry, 1974, 1978, around my birthday. And I'm not going to go through the 80s of when people like Ricky Gervais, Brian Cox were all part of bands. We're just going to talk about how things work now from an operational perspective. DE is still there. It's going to be around for a few more years. We all got the announcement that it was going to be extended from 2030 to 20X. We don't know when that is. There will be a date. It slows things down a little bit for businesses, but it also, what it allows us to do is really think about how we can do it properly. So we haven't got that looming deadline day of being able to change all our systems over. And I guess what we've seen and what we're starting to see is the conversations with customers are coming about, what does this really mean? Do I have to re-engineer my entire framework to make this work? Do I have to come in and do real-time everything, right? Do I turn off DE and then turn on NPP the next day? And that can be challenging. It can offer treasury problems. It can offer liquidity issues where you're just seeing all that money come out. Direct entry does give us a delay in that funding piece, and customers, what we're really seeing is customers start to see how they can change the way they operate and how they pay and how they fund that, because they actually have some more time. They don't have to worry about cutoffs. They don't have to worry about making sure it's in before 6 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. They can do it on a Wednesday morning because they know within 10 or 15 minutes, 10 or 15 seconds, but give us some time, give us a buffer for that to end up in the other account. So they're the conversations we're starting to have. I want to talk later on about how we do that from an engineering perspective, but what I think we'll start to cover off now is very much around how does the money flow for a business and how does that look for business leaders especially. Like I just touched on, that doesn't mean you have to do everything so far in advance, right? We know there's a business process that goes on in all of our companies, whether that's the self-approval through the ERP system, whether that's sending that up to Transacted Global for an online approval within our system before you dispatch that out, whether it's to an ANZ account or to the network. That's where you really start to want to look at how you can actually manage the payments and who really is critical to that. We know the number one thing that we need to pay out is payroll, right? We need to make sure people are paid. And what we're really seeing from customers now is, how can we put payroll onto the NPP rails? How can we make sure that a customer is going to get paid guarantee? And because if that person gets paid, chances are they're going to rock up to work tomorrow again. We put that into DE and it gets stuck. There's an industry problem. There's a delay for processing for whatever reason. That leads to problems, whether that was through host to host, whether it's through, from an RBA perspective, whatever that might be. And we see stuff like that happen all the time. The standards that we have to adhere to from a real-time perspective are much higher. Our SLAs are much tighter. We put onto significant pressure from a build perspective to make sure that we are 24/7. We have some limits in there that we can do in regards to how we can bring down our infrastructure for patching, because we've obviously got to make sure it's all secure and well governed. But from a payment processing perspective, we have to make sure that when you send your payments through at 11 o'clock at night or 3 o'clock in the morning, depending on how your runs go, is that they're gonna make it to the person that you wanted to pay. And I guess that's the payroll piece, right? That's where we want to make sure that when your payroll comes through at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the morning, that makes it to all of your staff in that same amount of time. Then when it comes to vendors, on the flip side, we obviously all want our vendors to be paid, but that might be the decision point. That might be the decision point where, from a business perspective, you think, right, I'm going to focus on the most important people, and they're the people that work for me, and they're the people that give me the most amount of output. And then I'm going to start to look at how I can then move around the vendor piece. The piece around the vendors, and the reason I call that out as well, is that there's still the reconciliation piece to tie back into this. And I'm going to touch on, while I talk through some of this, I'll touch on a few of the other services that we do as well. Things like pay ID resolution or COP, for example. The thing that we see with vendor payments is sometimes you get the account numbers wrong. Sometimes the account numbers need to be validated, they need to be checked, and we have systems and services now called COP, or confirmation of payee. I'll try to stay away from some of the acronyms, but confirmation of payee. That means you can go out and you can check that your payment is valid and the recipient is a real person. It's not only just good for making sure you're paying to the right account number, the great person, it's a huge defense mechanism against the cyber attack. And we're seeing a massive uplift in that now, where even from the bad guys are coming in and saying, instead of paying, Matthew Cafferty, send it to Matthew Cafferty Limited, right? Because they've got it, they know they can bypass some of the old way of doing things by putting different names or different acronyms on the end of it that'll try to bypass that. COP is a really great way of avoiding that. COP is making sure that when Matt Cafferty gets paid, he is the person that I'm actually paying. And we're talking to customers a lot now about how we can put that into your flow. We have APIs now that you can hit, it'll give you an instant response back. And the ANZ offering is from an industry perspective. So that is an industry account store. There's a lot of hype and a lot of opportunities out there for something that we call observed data. So that's data that we would hold internally. ANZ has made a really concerted effort to use the industry information. As a bank, it's up to us to make sure that we update the account store. So Matt Cafferty's account is not just Matt Cafferty's account here, it's Matt Cafferty's account everywhere else in the industry. So when I'm coming from another bank, Bank B, for example, it's Matt Cafferty's account there as well. It's not based on any patterns or any sort of information, although that is a really good and really useful thing. We really made a decision to do it that way. The other side of that is the guaranteed account number that you get is the payroll, right? I'm going to make sure that you have the right BSV account number, and that's going to be right for when you send me my salary each week. Vendor payments change, vendor accounts change, and we do see fluctuations in that part, in that side of things. Kathleen, I don't know if you wanted to jump in on some of that stuff as well.
No, well, I think you talked a little bit about my enthusiasm at the start, but it's clear you're very passionate about some of these. You're going to run me out of questions through these. But you touched on something that I think is really important here, and certainly not to diminish that there's obviously a technical element to some of these new technologies as we put them into place. But often the biggest challenge we find for some of our customers is the business process change that comes on the back of this. And because when we think about real-time payments, we often think beyond simply just the payment arrives faster. From my perspective, I actually don't think speed's the most exciting part about what happens with real-time payments. The name piece aside, I think it's more about what you said. How do I automate more off the back of this? I'm getting more data with these types of payments. How do I use that to become more efficient in my reconciliation, for example? How do my operational processes change when I'm looking sort of at a 24/7 environment? So we're keen for you to sort of unpack a little bit more. What does change when money sort of starts to move instantly on these rails, and what do customers need to sort of think about as they change those processes?
Tough question, right? No, a really enthusiastic one. I thought that would be one of yours. Now, look, from an operations perspective, what we try to do here at ANZ is very much to try and limit the exposure of what that means for our customers. We don't want to as I mentioned before, deadline day, for anybody that follows football, deadline day is kind of a big deal. And when we're working on migrations, deadline day is that looming date that everything's going to be switched off. So 2030 for us, although we want to get everybody onto new rails and that, it gives us real good time to plan how that means. And for us, it's really about how we can tell our customers to actually don't change very much of what you're doing now, right? Let's stick with the same processes. Let's segment off payment types or file types that you're using now and see how we can then move them across onto the new rails or the new patterns for processing, so that your operations perspective looks exactly the same there. And File Active is, I'm really proud of File Active. Anybody heard me talk about it last time, right? File Active is a great way that we can do that. We don't have to all move to APIs tomorrow. They're a great thing. It gives you real-time, one-off, low volume payments through that, but we don't have to shift everything. We've really focused here on minimizing the operational impact of doing this. For us, and we're seeing a lot more of this, is customers are still sending us direct entry files, still flat file, 120 characters, that still says they want to pay, Bob Smith, this is the account number and it's $50. they still send us that file, and then we take that file and we put it through the MPP payment processing. So although it looks to your operational side that it's a direct entry file and the payment process is the same, we can actually uplift that. And what we've also done at ANZ, which is really unique, and we're really pushing this hard, is we've taken direct entry and made it into a single debit multi-credit. So it looks exactly the same from a processing perspective. And it's really exciting because we have some limitations of what we do that, because we're pumping a heap of data through and a heap of numbers through from a processing perspective. We're starting to increase the volume of what we can actually process across that. So we're trying to make MPP look as much like as direct entries as it should. Because that onus should be on us as a bank to help you integrate into these better rails first. We can't come out to everybody and say, here, change everything you do. You've got 2 years, 3 years, 4 years to do that, or sometimes 3 months. But we can't come out to you and expect you to do that. And that's where, from a file active perspective, that's what we're here to do. We're here to really try and make that change as minimal as possible. Now, not all accounts are MPP reachable. Not every account. It could be some sort of building society account, it could be a credit union account, it could be a particular type of offset that you hold, or a loan, or we can't hit everything real time. About 97-98% of accounts can be hit real time, but for them ones that don't, what happens through a process flow is we take that payment, we send it off to go pay the money. We actually get an answer back that says, no, this is not MPP reachable, you can't do real time here. And then we'll step that payment down and we'll push that payment through direct entry rails. And we'll work with you on how reconciliation looks. So you'll get a big answer back that says, here's 1,000 payments that got paid, and then here's 5 that didn't. But we process them 5 through the traditional rails. And I think that's the real differentiator here. By doing what you see at your normal retail bank, when you go into your ANZ Plus account and you say, pay Matt's getting a heap of money today, by the way. Pay Matt,
from himself.
Yeah, from himself to himself, right? There's not that much money in the account, right? When you send me $1, I'll bring the down because the balance is decreasing. But when you send me $1, you don't care how that makes it to the other side. From a retail perspective, you want to make sure sometimes that Terry gets his $1 because he bought you I was going to say coffee, but what can you get for $1? A lollipop?
If you're lucky, at least.
Freddo's $1, right? So you send $1, right, to pay for the Freddo that Terry was so nice to buy you at lunchtime. You don't care what rail that goes down, and that's really, we need to be agnostic with our customers about that, how that operates as well, and that's really from a file active perspective that we're doing that. Now, we talked a lot about Pay 2, and Pay 2 is obviously the new mandate service about collection of money, but we really want to talk about, we're going to cover off a lot of how we send the payments out from this perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to think about it, because touching back on what you said, we don't advocate here for a big bang approach, which every single payment journey, every single process over in one go. We're really focused on those phased transitions and starting where it makes the most sense. And for me personally, when I work with clients, I think about what are the key identifiers on what that first payment journey should be for you to start sort of dabbling into the real-time payment worlds. And we look at a few things around, well, where's there high friction? Are you dealing with somewhere where there's manual workarounds? Have you got sort of customer complaint about processing dishonors and things like that? Or is there somewhere where there's a really clear value unlock? Can you do a payment journey today that you couldn't otherwise do? We're looking at, can you do automated investing, for example? That's hard in today's rails, using the existing sort of payment channels. Can you do on-demand payouts, for example? For that's a new experience that's not possible on the old rails, but also, where is there, to some degree, a bit of a contained scope so you can pilot and learn? You want to test these new technologies out in your business in a safe and contained way, and then we sort of expand them out from there. And so a lot of the journeys where we're starting to see customers get involved in is what you touched on, Pay 2 on the consumer side, both for the recurring payments and also particularly in some cases even some one-off payments where we're looking at account-to-account rails as an alternative for card payments in some examples as well. Payday Super is obviously the other really topical one where we're seeing a lot of businesses start to dabble in the NPP for the first time. You've got time-bound requirements on making those payments that you didn't previously have before, and that is where the speed element does become really important, for example. But also things like, as I mentioned before, sort of on-demand payouts. We've seen for a while, and we've been doing these for a while, things like insurance payouts in a disaster scenarios. How do you get money out really quickly? That's not possible through the DE rails. You need to be doing that in a more automated way, and you need to be able to leverage the rails and things that you can access through that. So when we're thinking about where customers should start, that's the types of things that we look at for customers as well. Are there any sort of particular journeys that you're kind of excited about, or where you're seeing customers start to sort of lean into?
Yeah, look, I think the insurance payout is a huge one. And we're seeing more and more of that, and certainly not just from customers that have already onboarded to the service and are using the service, but more and more talking to us about how we can make, we live in a 24/7 world, right? There's always things happening everywhere, and I think that's the really big thing about how we do this, and how if your business is around the clock and needs to make payments around the clock, well then we've got to be able to facilitate and do that. And again, you've got to think about how can I do that as a business? Visi, one of our customers, and it's out there as a white paper, etc. Is you go to a bottle machine, here in Victoria, you put your bottle in, you get your 10 cents back, and that can go straight into your account. That through the bottle deposit scheme basically comes back around the circle, comes back through File Active, and we send that payment out. It's just a really neat way of actually rounding all this stuff off, and we're moving away from the days of I'll send it to you and you'll receive it in 2 days, and I'll send it on Friday, but I missed the cutoff by 5 minutes, and you're going to have to wait till Monday to receive that. And to look back into some of that business process, we've got much better services as well of how, from a reconciliation. Am I okay to touch on reconciliation now?
You can go to reconciliation.
We've got better ways of how we can help you reconcile as well. And, payments, and certainly when we're sending payments through the MPP rails, and even if that is direct entry, we have ways of sending that, message IDs, and we've got some end-to-end flows that we can actually match backwards and forwards, so we can do the reconciliation thing. But when we're talking about inbound MPP, so someone finally wants to send me money to top up my bank account because I've gone and bought someone else a Freddo, we've got better ways to tell everybody how that's done. So traditionally, most of our customers sit there and we wait till tomorrow's account statements, or BTR as we call it, but we wait for that inbound account statement information to come in, and that generally for most customers comes in about 2:30, 3 a.m. in the morning. Host to host, some customers get it pushed, but we see a large amount of customers that actually wait till they arrive and they come in to pull the information from us. And then they don't do anything with that till 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, until the team arrive, or they get an email with it in, or something like that. What we're seeing is, as much as we want to see your money going out and being paid out, you want to know when that money's coming in as well. So we've really uplifted the way that we do that. We have services called real-time notifications, and that's a way that we tell you when money hits your account. So if we go back to the traditional way of doing what we call intraday balance and transaction reporting, where we'll send your file every hour, every 2 hours, 4 times a day, we have, we also now have ways of telling you when a payment hits your account. So for example, someone sends you $1, that dollar then gets a real-time notification within seconds that we push that via a webhook into your system. So you can then update your system to say, you have received this fund. So it's not just all about paying out, it's also looping in and back into the real-time notification to say you have received this money as well. So you might see everything go out. You can't have that, you don't want to be in a position where you don't see what's coming in at the same time. I mean, you don't want to have to wait till tomorrow morning. And if it's on a Friday or Saturday, you're going to wait till Tuesday morning for some of that information. So I think, for us, it's very much about looping all that information around.
Yeah, and I think that certainty piece is one of the sort of more unheralded parts around sort of real-time payments, is that knowing, money's in your account, that's paid, that's cleared, that's settled funds. And that's kind of a different experience in terms of how you can automate processes off the back of that. You can release delivery of goods. You can do all of these types of experiences that are a little more challenging on the rails that we have today. So if we go back, Matt, let's say customers picked their journey, they've sort of decided to lean in, they want to get going on one of these use cases, they've come to you with that. What do you like to establish with them and sort of set up from the beginning? What do you need to sort of have the processes in place so we make sure kind of nothing catches anyone by surprise about what is changing when we get down the track? Yeah,
look, it's really important. The journey of host-to-host integration has changed considerably, and it's going to change even more, next 6 months, 12 months. It really is evolving. We go back to the 80s and the 90s, where we used to give customer a metal box that held the keys and the security side. It was across the lease line, and it was a physical device, and no one could do anything from a host-to-host perspective. We did a little bit of we didn't have SFTP. We did some lease line, and we had protocols like XCOM. I'm talking 80s, I should go 90s or 2000s. We had things like ANZ Align. There was other banks out there that had products as well, where you dial up a modem and you'd send them files across. The evolution of host to host came, in the the early 2000s, mid 2000s, where we started to see some more open protocols and SSH. But what we're still doing was, basically going, hey, Mr. Customer, here's a file format. Here's a way to connect to us. And ANZ, we had WebLink and we had SFX, and would say, go figure that out and come back to us, and we'll help you integrate and we can do some payments. And that time took a long time to get there. Because your IT departments generally didn't know what that meant. They didn't know what it looked like. They had the output because we had, like I said, ADA files since 1978. But they didn't know what to do the next part. Fast forward into the early 2000s and 2011 when we launched File Active, we said, actually, forget all that now. Forget that. You can connect to us via SFTP because that's how you connect to all of your third parties, all of your vendors, etc. Don't worry about your file formats because you know what, File Active has orchestration and we can do all that for you. So come to us with an iDoc, an XML, A, B, C, D, E, right? Picture of a red pen, picture of a blue pen, and we'll convert that into a payments. We're moving further and further advanced to that, where that's no longer, the way forward. We can't just come to you and say, hey, you figure it out, because you've got enough stuff going on to do that. So the first thing that we really like to do is we want to have an understanding of that business process, right? Like I said before, we don't want to just come out and say, here's a file format, do this. And we really want to take you on that journey of what that means. And when it comes to real-time payments, well, then it's going to change your operation somewhat. We're going to do the minimal amount that we have to do. Well, not we're going to do the minimal amount. We're going to try to impact your business, in the most minimal amount of way. But we need to understand that. I just think giving you a list of what to do for an NPP payment just isn't the way. And I think, that's where we're trying to change that way. Our frontline bankers are really great at talking about how we do banking. And we've got to really lean in on how we can do that from an engineering perspective as well. The next phase of that really looks about how we then take you from a file format, to some APIs. And APIs are really good, right? But I already know APIs are just the file formats of the future, right? We've got an amazing developer portal, developer.online.anz.com. It's got all of our APIs in there. You can do everything, right? But we're trending back towards, here's a file format, here's a connectivity method, right? And I don't think that's going to work long term. I think that's really good for customers that understand APIs, they understand frameworks, they understand how to deliver stuff, and that OAuth and all that sort of stuff, and security. But I don't think it's not the way that we're going to really build this and move this quickly. Because once you've done some NPP payments via your DE file or via your ISO file, whatever your system's outputting, you're going to want to then integrate that better, and you're going to really want to know how you can make that live. So you press a button in your payment system and bang, it's at ANZ and it's in Matt Caffey's account. Just to loop that story back. We've got to really think about, how we can transition that across, and pretty soon we're going to start showing that off. We've got it all there. It's ready to go, where we can really talk to your engineers and show your engineers how they can better integrate with us. And a payment is really easy, right? It's one API, right? Hit me an API, then get me a response and tell me how that payment went. What we're seeing now is more workflow-based stuff, right? More workflow-based flows, pay two, right? You've got to do one thing, then you've got to do another, and then you've got to do another, right? If we want to pull the end-to-end piece in to loop it back to COP, well, I've got to do a COP call, right? And once I've done my COP call and I know it's the valid account, I've got to do a payment call, right? And once I've done a payment call, I want to do the next thing to check my account balance to make sure that that's there as well. I've got to do a status thing. And that's where it gets really challenging for customers and their engineers and their BAs and that sort of thing. And we really want to change that journey for customers. We want to make sure that you can just actually come to us and say, well, here's my flow. Here's the 4 things I want to do as part of that flow. Help me do it. We've got some great tools out there. Everybody sits at home vibe coding, right? Using up all the tokens at night to figure out how to do really cool stuff to solve problems. And we really want to come out to you guys and showcase how we can do that to help you. And I think that's my little sneak peek of how we can really change the way that you integrate. If you're not using some of this, code generation stuff, whether it's Codex, whether it's, Claude, we really need to start moving forward on how that is. The productivity gains that we're seeing out there for all of our customers is just sensational, and we're seeing it already internally as well. And this isn't about AI replacing what people do. This is about AI making us be able to do more, right? It's all about the productivity side. So I can take what I have now and I can work on that. But if I want to know what I can do in 3 months, 6 months, well, I can do that in a week or 2 weeks now, right? And that's the really exciting part for us. And we want to get to that point with our customers where we can sit down and have a meaningful discussion, and we can have a meaningful flow. We can whiteboard it one day, and then we can throw it into how this is going to flow, right? Or we might not even whiteboard it. We might just, describe it. And that's the benefit of prompting. Once you get into the nitty gritty of how that works and learning really how to wield the beast of Anthropic or OpenAI, well, then you really get to start to see the benefits of that. And we're really happy to start talking to customers about how they can better do that in their own environments. And any of the customers that I've met recently, we're talking about that, and everybody's eyes open because they know the benefit of it, right? And they know the benefit of how to do this. So, back to the question you asked me, 7 or 8 minutes ago. I kind of get a bit excited. Back to the question is, this is about taking that journey with customers, right? Not just coming in saying, go try this and figure that out. This is about us taking the customer on that end-to-end journey of how does this change your operations? What can you do now? What can you do tomorrow? And what does the future look like for you as well?
Yeah, I think, well, if anyone here is listening to this thing, the main takeaway is going to be that you literally can't wait to get your hands on some of these problem statements.
Yeah, that's right.
So please bring them through, and we will deploy a Matt who will enthusiastically whiteboard, get on the tools, and help solve sort of the best outcome for you. Now, we do have a lot of questions coming through the chat, but I want to just ask one more quickly, Matt, so no 7 or 8 minutes for this one, but we just want to demystify something that a really common assumption is that when you move to real-time payments, it requires, a full systems rebuild, a full sort of everything's got to change, your ERP connectivity, everything like that. Can you just give us your perspective on how true that is and what does it actually
Have you not been listening? I think I've covered that already.
We want to really clean.
No, look, I know, sorry. It's not the case, right? It really isn't the case. This is the whole point. We want to have these conversations with our customers is how we can start to move you across to this today. We can do it piece by piece, right? Let's look at a small flow. Let's look at something that you're doing already, right? And let's look at how we can uplift that onto some real-time flows. Let's look at what the COP journey looks for you. That might take a little bit longer because that has some effort involved. But I think let's talk about how we can do payments a lot quicker between ourselves and how we can uplift what your current flows already look like and your current business model, your current processing looks like, and how we can make that look and work for you straight away. So I don't think it has to be this, we'll put it off to deadline day. Let's start having them conversations now.
Yeah, as we like to say, start now, start somewhere. That's our tagline as part of this. So
that was that in Godfather 2, was it?
Yeah, that was actually one of the key lines of Godfather. So we, as I said, we've got a lot of questions coming through, so we really do want to bring you into the conversation. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Chelo, who has been monitoring the chat as they come through, and she'll read out a few for Matt or myself.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kathleen. You're right. We do have a number of questions that have popped through in the chat. So thank you very much, everybody, for engaging and posting your questions. Please keep them coming. I'll direct this first question to you, Kathleen, and then I'm sure, Matt, you may have a comment on this as well. But somebody has asked, they're thinking about real-time payments prioritization, and they've heard the discussion on focus areas like payroll, vendors, automating urgent or unusual volumes, and the security around that. So if you can comment, what's the list of criteria that they could use perhaps to decide which journey to move across first or next?
Yeah, and I will say it's a great question. And when we talk about those payroll examples, those vendor examples, those aren't our priorities. Those come from real life use cases that we see our customers move from. And what we find, obviously, in this space is generally where there's a problem somewhere that one customer's having, it's often replicated across a number in a similar industry as well. But I touched on a couple of sort of 3 kind of criteria points that we looked at earlier. But so just to sort of reiterate those is we look first for, where is that high friction? And we know that that's the case in a lot of payment journeys today. So where are you really dealing the most with manual reconciliation, manual workarounds, or where are you actually hearing potentially even from your customers that there's a pain point on their side in making a payment to you or having files missed or anything like that? That's often a really great signal as something where we can start and have a look from looking at it from a payment journey perspective. But also, as I said, where's a value unlock? What's a journey that you've always wished you've been able to do but can't for whatever reasons, or you get stuck based around a payment processing? I touched on some examples around auto investment options in the stockbroking space. That doesn't work in a direct debit world today. You take 3 business days to clear. The stock market's moved and you don't want your money going in after that. So examples like that are the real ones that we want to hear, because we want to see if we can help you unlock some of those efficiencies or some of those possibilities that you haven't been able to do as well. But also, as I said, if we're looking to start this for the first time, having that kind of a clearer scope and to some degree a bit of a contained scope. So we're looking at customers that want to start with Pay2, for example. Sometimes they have challenger brands under their main brands, or they might have a journey that's focused more around a digitally native audience, or things that it makes more sense to start with that technology, start there in your business and get those learns up really early before we sort of expand it out onto a wider scale as well. So just to sum up, as I said, if we look for friction first and foremost, or value unlock opportunities, but also where we've got a really clear scope and a way to kind of measure the impact and the benefit as we go through. That's what we really look for.
Excellent. Thank you, Kathleen. I'll direct this next question to you, Matt. It's one that our audience has upvoted quite a bit. So I think they're keen to know what NPP, or perhaps we can broaden that out to real-time payments, looks like for international payments.
Great question. I'm disappointed you didn't come to me for opinion with the priorities. It should have been the $1 Freddo, right?
Yeah. Where are the $1 Freddos?
Yeah, what are the $1 Freddos? Look, international payments, we're starting to move forward with that as well, and we see IPS send and IPS receive. We're starting to see that move forward, and we're seeing new products come in. From an ANZ perspective, we have access to, not only to New Zealand, we have access to Asia as well, Hong Kong, Singapore, India, and others. And they're all in our developer portal if you want to go have a look, developer.online.anz.com. I think I mentioned that before. But yeah, real-time payments. We have the ability to use real-time payments across multiple geographies in both Singapore, Hong Kong. We're seeing an uplift in how they use payments in New Zealand for real-time as well. But yeah, the cross-border funds transfer is there, and we're starting to move forward on that. We do have access to that, and we're seeing that. What we're going to need is the whole banking community from an international perspective to start to come to do that. And I don't think we're that far away from that. We're seeing an uplift and a changeover, and a lot of customers will be part of this as well, where we see this migration of SWIFT away from the old flat file, curly bracket way of doing things to ISO. That's the first start of that. We've seen some fintechs come through and say, we can do this, we're going to use blockchain, we use all this sort of stuff to move money around faster from an international perspective, but they all fall back onto the legacy banking systems. What we're going to start to see is that change. And we're working on some really cool stuff at the moment of how we can do that. We are starting to offer them services out on where that money comes from. We certainly see inbound payments coming in, and we get that money to you from a real-time perspective as well, and the send is also there. So yeah, international payments is there. The whole world needs to come together on that, but that uplift and certainly the SWIFT migration around that is part of us doing that. And the SWIFT, just to touch on the SWIFT migration, because everybody will have been contacted in regards to how that is. That at the moment is how we identify, and from an AML perspective, we've got town and country in there as well. We have a lot of unstructured data from payments, and FileActive is really good at mapping that and doing that for our customers. And what we need to do is make sure the right information is in the right place. Not a FileActive change for us, but certainly from an industry perspective, we're having to uplift all that sort of stuff.
Fantastic. Thanks, Matt, for that explanation. I think that's top of mind seems for a lot of our customers. So we've received a couple of questions regarding confirmation of pay, and I might bundle a couple of them together and get your opinion in the first instance, Kathleen. We have a question about the most common journeys that we're seeing confirmation of pay used within, so from a payments perspective. And then we've also had a question from somebody around batch-based processing and how confirmation of pay fits in there. They've specifically referenced the OSCO batch solution that we have in place, where they can convert their standard ABA files and process them through the NPP. So which confirmation of pay journeys are you seeing most commonly, and how do you see it working in with that batch-based processing?
Yeah, thanks, Taylor. And I'll make sure I throw to Matt so he doesn't get mad.
She's going to throw. She's definitely coming to me because
does get mad at me again for not answering. But in terms of the use cases and where we're most commonly seeing it being used, there's a couple of really key ones. Often people think a cop ahead of using it, taking a payment. You can actually look at it in terms of receiving a payment as well. Like we know in the direct debit processing world today, you've got no ability to actually verify the account someone puts down when they sign up to a direct debit agreement today. So we're seeing a number of customers actually leverage it to do a check when they receive details before establishing a direct debit agreement to make sure that I haven't got Matt's fee as being an account number from all the payments I've been sending him, and I've just decided that he's actually going to pay for my phone bill going forward. So actually using it ahead of those setups is also being a really popular use case. Obviously, as we said, ahead of any payments being made, but we want to encourage it, and this is going to tag team onto the batch question that Matt will answer shortly, is we're thinking about it with customers of decoupling it from the actual act of making the payment itself. So when we're saying using COP ahead of making a payment, it's actually more effectively done at that step of vendor upload or vendor onboarding or supplier onboarding at that step, so that when we get to the payment processing piece, we're not actually delaying that even further by running some extra checks and things at the time. We want to be creating that master list and making sure that those onboarding checks and things are being are completed at that sort of time. One of the other interesting ones that keeps coming up, which we didn't necessarily have on our list originally, is employee onboarding. So just setting up payroll accounts for employees. That's often a high cycle industry for a lot of our customers. So just being able to use it in that ability, and it's kind of why we focused on API capability for confirmation of pay as well, because we've just seen so many journeys where it makes sense to plug in. And if we're leveraging it through the API, then it gives you that flexibility to be able to put it in the employee onboarding into the vendor master list ahead of your direct debit processing in your CRM system as well. So you get enhanced ability to access that service, but also can help you from a workflow perspective. But Matt, did you want to comment on any of the COP sort of that batch discussion as well and how we see it?
Yeah, the batch discussion is really interesting. We're seeing a lot of demand for customers to do their backbook, to basically go through, here is the vendor list I have already, here's all my beneficiaries, go around and check them. And we've got to look at how we can commercialize products to do that and make that easy for you. So you can actually do that, because Kathleen's 100% right. This is, I load a vendor, I do a check, I move on, but we've got a bit of catching up to do. And people are using COP and some of that backbook migration piece, for two reasons. One, are all my employees NPP? Can I pay everybody from an NPP perspective so I can pay them today instead of tomorrow? But they're also, are all my vendors who they say they are as well? So we've got some work to do there. As far as a batch, send us a file in, we do that confirmation perspective. Look, that's where we've countered that with the step down process. The step down process is a way of countering, not just the COP perspective, but also from a flow perspective. I think it's going to take us another 6 months or 12 months to clear out, for us all to have the right beneficiary list, to be confident about who we're sending based on what we have. Not saying that we're not confident, but to have that certainty around the confirmation of pay. What we don't want to do, and we haven't agreed on at an industry level, is we don't want to start rejecting payments just because they're not addressable or for whatever reason. We see, certainly when we come to trust accounts on behalf of accounts, anything from an off-system B2B perspective, that account might be Matt Cafferty on behalf of ABC Limited. Now, that doesn't come through from a COP perspective, right? Because Matt Cafferty is the account name, that makes it through the banking system. So what we don't want to do is start cutting off all of that, all of them, and rejecting them. And you send into the 1,000 payments and we reject half of them based on that COP piece. So I think we've got to still work with customers on the best way of catching up, working on their business flows, working on what that onboarding piece looks like, whether it's from an employee or a vendor or something else like that, but also put that as part of the payment flow. When we do move to some of these APIs for payments, it's put an account number in, check it with COP, then send the payment back. Send the payment after that, but easy for me to say.
Great. Thank you both for answering that question. We have a couple minutes left, so we'll try to fit in as many as we can, but I'll ask this next one. Again, I'll throw it to Kathleen first, but I am keen for Matt's perspective as well. Do you see the uptake of real-time payments more driven by the customer, or perhaps we can say the recipient of the payment, or driven by the payer? So perhaps the business who's paying it out. And perhaps with the customer piece, are there particular demographics where you might expect to see more or less take up of real-time payments?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we do like to kind of go to the age-old adage of it's a little chicken and egg to a degree as to where some of these journeys do start. And we know for things like when we started with real-time payments, originally we look at things like Pay ID. The original uptake was obviously in that younger demographic, a little bit more digitally native, the ones who kind of expect things to happen fast, quick, seamless, easy. I know, for example, my parents, I only got them to make a Pay ID about 12 months ago. So it's a bit of a process to get people to sort of adopt those new technologies and things as well. But what we're seeing in terms of they want to adopt a real-time payments, it's often generally coming, and it touches on that earlier point I meant about where there's high friction or a clear value add around what is that customer journey or customer experience that you want to make better. So if we think of things like Pay2, for example, and where we're seeing the uptake being driven in that, There's a lot of that want around that greater control around direct debits that you don't currently have today, that greater visibility of your payment flow, and that ability to schedule set payments, have them process on weekends, elements like that customers are asking of businesses, and then businesses sort of coming to us and go, how do we solve this? How do we make this the most sort of appropriate process? But then there are elements that are a bit more business led, like I touched a little bit on Payday Super, and that, you know, there's requirements there that you've got to be complying with certain days now for processing payments as well. So we need to make sure that we're availing the most appropriate rails to be doing so as part of that. So there's a little bit of the element of both. It's also a supply and demand marketplace to some degree as well. We need more people using it in the ecosystem to have more people understanding what the experience looks like, understanding the process, and then asking for it. So we always sort of talk about creating a little bit of a flywheel as to how that sort of goes around. So the demand can come from both sides, but that makes sure that we really want to understand, you know, what your customer problems are, what your business's problems are, and as Matt said, really want to bring those to us so that we can talk through them in the best way possible.
I think we're going to have to put some more money in the meter because we're hitting time. Yeah. Just to answer that as well, I don't think the uptake's enough. At the moment, we're only seeing 2 or 3% of our volumes going through the NPP rails, and we've really got to break through that. We've got to start having them conversations, and customers have got to start initiating them conversations to start pushing that through. And that is, maybe it's fair, maybe the deadline date has been moved, so there's not to push for that. But there's also the fact that, you know, people think the technology change is huge. I think they think that change is so big that they don't need to do that. They're going to have to do internal projects and cost ITs. That I think we need to open up them conversations and start to move, you know, take away that as the blocker of moving onto the real-time payments side of things. So yeah, that would be it for me. I think we've got to demystify, get rid of, take the blockers out, and have the conversations and all them other wonderful words around that to actually say, well, actually, it is possible, and this is how it is possible. I think that'll start to move it further.
Yeah, no, thank you, Matt. And thank you, Telly, for taking us through those questions. And I think what you just walked through there, Matt, sort of really captures why we want to have this conversation, is to help demystify, help address some of those blockers or some of those thought processes that you might be having about why you can't start this or where you think you're getting stuck, so we can work through them. Because what we really sort of want to impress upon people is that the payments itself is not necessarily the hard part. The interesting work is actually how you go and integrate those into the business, you know. And as we said, how do you operate when there are no cutoffs? How do you build that trust element through validation, and how all of that works at 2 p.m. just as well as it might at 2 a.m. In this new world where everything's on 24/7. So you don't need to leave today with, you know, a perfect roadmap or a fully formed sort of end state of what your vision looks like. But hopefully we have left you today with a bit of a clearer sense of where kind of real-time payments are heading and where they might already be touching your organization, and where some of those gaps, friction points, or unanswered questions might still sit. So we don't necessarily want you to have a long to-do list to go away with this, but we want you to sort of take one kind of simple next step here. You know, pick a payment journey that you might take for granted today, or the one that might be high friction, and ask whether has it really been designed for the world we're operating in now, or has it just been one that's been inherited, and we can have a look at it and see how we can make it sort of more efficient. And as we said, today's session is being recorded, so please share it around your organisation for anyone that you think might find it useful, and we'll share how you can access that after this. Also, if we didn't get to your question today, please don't just sit on it. Reach out. We genuinely welcome the conversation and love to sort of continue that discussion with you as well. So thank you again for joining us as part of the Future Ready Now webinar series, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Enjoy the rest of your day.